Hello friends, in this video lecture we are going to discuss database concept and architecture. What will be discussed in this lecture? The database schema and instance, database state, data model and types of data model. So first, schema and instances. What is database schema? Database schema means what? The overall design structure of the database is called as the database schema, or we can say the skeleton structure of the database is called as the database schema. Then what is instance of database? Instance of database means at a particular moment or at a particular time the content which is stored in the database are called as the schema of the database. This is the definition. The data which is stored in the database at a particular moment of time is called instance of database, and the overall design structure of the database is called as the database schema, or you can say database schema is the skeleton structure of the database and it represents the logical view of entire database. And the schema containing what? The schema containing object like table, views, different keys like foreign key, primary keys, data type, store procedures, etc. This is an example of database schema. So this is a college database, and this database contain object like table, student table, course table, section table, grade report table, and this is the overall design structure of the college database schema. So next we have to know what is the difference between database schema and database state. So database schema we know that is the overall design structure of the database, and database states means what? The content of the database. That means those data the user stored in the database are known as the database state. Then what is valid state? Valid state means what? A state that satisfies the structure and constraint of database, that is called valid state. That means according to database constraint, according to database structure, the user must put the data or store the data in the database, and that concept is known as valid state of the database. Then what is the difference between database schema and database state? Database schema changes very infrequently, but database state changes every time when the user update database or when database update automatically. Then the schema is also called as the intention and the state is called as the extension of the database. So this is an example of database state. The table, course table containing the data, and these are called as the content of the database, or these are called as the state of the database. This is the example of database state. So next is data model. Data model is what? Data model define the logical design and structure of a database. So logical design and structure of a database means what? Here we define the data type, the relationship among the entities in the database and the constraints used in the database. These are defined by the data model, and also the operations which are used for manipulating this structure are also included in the data model. Data model is also defined. It defines how data will be stored, accessed and updated in database management system and certain constraints that the database should obey. Then we have to know what are the different types of data model. There are three different types of data model are there. First one is your conceptual or high level data model, physical data model or low level data model, implementation or representational data model. Conceptual data model is what? That provides concept that are close to the way many users perceive data, and that also called as entity based or object based data model. The example of conceptual data model is entity relationship data model, and second one is your physical data model or low level data model. Physical data model means what? That describe the details about the data. That means how the data will be stored in the database, what is the storage structure, what is the storage format in the database. That is the physical data model. Last one is your implementation data model. Implementation data model provide the concept, that concept fall in between the above two data model, and that is used by many commercial DBMS implementation, and the subcategories of data models are as follows. These are the subcategories of the data model: hierarchical data model, network data model, entity relationship data model and relational data model. So, first we have to know what is hierarchical data model. Hierarchical data model is what? In this model, data are organized in a tree like structure. That means with a single root to which all other data is linked. So, see the picture how this hierarchical data model is represented. In first, the root is college and the college having two children, that is department and infrastructure, and department is again divided into 3 child or department containing 3 child, that is course, teacher, student, and the course are also having 2 child, that is theory and labs. The hierarchy starts from the root of the data, that is the hierarchy starts from the college and expand like a tree, adding the child node to the parent node. That means your college is your parent node and the parent node having 2 child, one is your department, another one is your infrastructure. In similar way, the department root node having 3 child, that is your course, teacher, student. In this same process, the course parent having 2 child, that is theory and lab. And this model having a child will only have single parent. You can see here the child nodes have only one parent. Okay. Then in this data model, the relationship is that in this data model, the relation between parent and child is 1 to many. That means one parent can have more than one child, but you must remember one child should be one parent in the hierarchical data model. We can give the real time example in the real world example, that is the index of the books, the recipes are the example of hierarchical data model. Next, we have to know what is network data model or what is the difference between hierarchical data model and network data model. Network data model is the higher version of or extension of the hierarchical data model. In this data model, the data is organized more like a graph and allowed to have more than one parent having a child. So, in network data model, this network data model is the extension of hierarchical data model, and in this model data are organized more like a graph. In network data model, a child may have more than one parent, but in hierarchical data model, a child should have only one parent. That is the main difference between network data model and hierarchical data model. That is, hierarchical data model child only have one parent, but in network data model the child node has more than one parent. So, in hierarchical data model the relationship between parent and child node is 1 to many, but in network data model the relationship is many to many. That means the relationship between parent and child is many to many, and this was the most widely used data model before the relational data model. Next is your entity relationship model. So, entity relationship model is what? This is containing different entities are related using relationship, and in this ER model it is defined to represent the relationship into pictorial form to make easier for different stakeholders to understand the entity relationship model. So, here we have to know about what is entity, what is relationship. Entity means what? Entity is the real time object having some logical and physical existence, and this entity having some properties or behavior, these are called the attribute. So, here we can also take one example. Suppose student is the entity in a college database and student having some properties name, role, mark, address, date of birth, and this name, role, mark, address, date of birth are known as the attribute of the student entity. And what is relationships? Suppose we can take another entity in the college database, that is suppose teacher entity, and if teacher is an entity and having some properties and attribute, that is teacher having teacher ID, teacher having salary, having date of joining. So, these are the attribute of a teacher entity, and the relationship established in between teacher and student are teachers, and that is called as the relationship between both the entities, that is student and teacher, right. So, here we can take one example. I already explained about the example. To design a college database, then student will be an entity having attribute name, age, address, and teacher will be another entity having attribute ID, address, salary, designation, etc. And there will be a relationship between teacher and student entity. You can see the picture. The teacher entity containing attribute, the entity is represented by a rectangle symbol and the attributes are represented by the oval symbol. Similarly, the teacher entity is represented by rectangle symbol and the attributes are represented by the oval symbol, and relationship is represented by in a diamond symbol, and very briefly we can discuss in our next video. And this is the relationship between entity and relationship model. So, next is relational data model. Relational data model is what? In this model, data is organized in a two-dimensional table and the relationship is maintained by storing some commercial field. Two-dimensional, we can see the two-dimensional table is used to represent the relationship, and this model is introduced by EF code in 1970s, and it has been most widely used database model around the world. In relationship, in a relational data model, the data are represented by using two-dimensional table. The table columns are containing field of the table and table rows are containing data of the table. Thank you.